The world's most powerful doctors couldn't save him, but one woman who was invisible to them all held the key to his survival. Kenneth Blackwell, a tech mogul with unimaginable wealth, he's in the hospital, surrounded by the world's best doctors, but no one knows what's causing his rapid deterioration. The room is full of tension, and you can almost feel the life slipping away from him. For the first time in his life, wealth couldn't buy him the answers he desperately needed. But someone else, someone most people would never look twice at, saw what no one else did. But now, in this room, his empire meant nothing. He was dying, and no one could figure out why. We've run every test, examined every possible diagnosis. His liver's failing, his kidneys are shutting down, and yet we can't pinpoint what's causing this. Nothing is adding up. Angela had always been the silent observer. She moved through life unnoticed, her presence acknowledged only when it was required. But she had a past, one that, like a dream, was slowly fading, yet still held the essence of who she once was. Angela Beaumont had once been a rising star in the world of science. A chemistry student with a scholarship, she was on her way to great things. But life intervened, as it often does. Her parents' tragic accident forced her to put her dreams on hold. "I'll be there in an hour. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." The scholarship she had worked so hard for was gone. Her future was reshaped by the responsibilities she inherited. Her family needed her, and her dreams faded into the background. She dropped out of college, left everything behind, and took on the role of caretaker, putting her ambitions aside. At Morningside Hospital, Angela was invisible. To the doctors, to the nurses, to the patients, she was a shadow. But the truth was, Angela had a mind capable of seeing things others didn't. Her sharp intellect had never left her. It had simply been waiting, quietly, to be used again. But here in this hospital, Angela's visibility wasn't her strongest trait. She had always been overlooked by the doctors, her intelligence dismissed as nothing more than a fluke. The medical staff, immersed in their own world of science and testing, never gave her a second thought. Today, the atmosphere in Kenneth Blackwell's suite is different. The tension is palpable. Doctors are huddled together, arguing over the latest test results. A $20 billion empire and the life of its founder now hanging in the balance. The stakes are higher than ever, but the solution is nowhere to be found. Every test we've run is coming back inconclusive. His liver function is failing, his kidneys are shutting down. This doesn't make sense. Nothing adds up. Angela observed the doctors, noticing what they overlooked. Their frustration was loud and obvious. But Angela's sharp eyes were noticing the details they had missed. The slight tremor in Kenneth's hand, the subtle yellowing of his skin, and most importantly, the way his condition had progressed so rapidly despite being treated for everything under the sun. It was the hand cream. Angela's mind began to race. She remembered reading about thallium poisoning in her chemistry classes years ago. The symptoms Kenneth displayed matched what she had learned about thallium. Slow, insidious, and nearly impossible to detect unless you knew what to look for. The doctors were too focused on the tests, too focused on the complicated diagnoses when the answer was right in front of them, hidden in plain sight. Angela knew this, but would anyone believe her? Angela knew she had to act. The tests weren't going to help them. The doctors were too consumed by their own bureaucracy to see what was right in front of them. She needed to prove it herself. She had no choice. This wasn't just about Kenneth anymore. It was about Angela, her knowledge, her past, and the courage to step forward and act when no one else would. This was her moment. But what if she was wrong? What if this was all in her head? She was right. Thallium poisoning. It was there. But now she faced a new dilemma. Who would believe her? And more importantly, would anyone listen? Angela had the answer. But the question remains, would anyone believe her? The doctors had their own methods. They had their own egos. Could a housekeeper with no credentials convince them of something so simple yet so dangerous? What would Angela do next? Would she find the courage to speak out, or would she remain silent? Just another invisible woman in a world of power and privilege. Kenneth Blackwell had always been a man who controlled everything. He had built an empire from scratch, driven by his vision, ambition, and ruthless drive. But now, none of that mattered. The sickness was taking everything from him, the very essence of his power slipping through his fingers. Every test we've done, every theory we've explored has led us nowhere. His liver function continues to fail, his kidneys are shutting down, we're running out of options, but nothing is adding up. They were failing. All the years of training, all the knowledge they possessed, but none of it had prepared them for this. Kenneth Blackwell's condition was a mystery that the world's top experts couldn't solve. The billionaire who had lived by the rules of power and control was now at the mercy of something far beyond his reach. Kenneth had always been a man who commanded respect, who made decisions that shaped industries, but now he was powerless, dependent on machines to breathe, on doctors who had no answers. The irony was not lost on him. He, who once believed that money could solve anything, now realized that it couldn't buy him health. It couldn't buy him life. For Angela, this wasn't just another day of cleaning and tidying. It was more than that. She had seen Kenneth Blackwell's rise, his dominance in the tech world. He was untouchable, a man of power and influence. But in the silence of this room, he was vulnerable, just like everyone else. Angela was invisible to most, but in this moment, she had the clarity to see what the doctors had missed. Angela had always been the one overlooked, the one who cleaned, who tended to the small details. But in the midst of this medical chaos, she had an insight, a spark of something that had been buried for years, a knowledge and understanding she hadn't used in a long time. She wasn't just a housekeeper, she was more than that. We need a solution, not more tests. We've already ruled out everything we can. The liver failure is progressing faster than we anticipated. His body isn't responding to the treatment. We have to think outside the box. We've done everything, Rachel. We've tried everything. He's going to die if we don't come up with a new plan, and fast. Angela could hear the doctor's frustration, their panic, as they searched for answers, but they were missing the most obvious answer of all. Kenneth Blackwell's body was showing the signs of something they hadn't even considered, a slow-acting poison. She recognized it instantly. It was poisoning, and it had been happening gradually, hidden in plain sight. Angela had learned about thallium poisoning years ago in chemistry class. She remembered the symptoms all too well: nausea, fatigue, yellowing of the skin, and neurological damage. She knew exactly what was happening. But would anyone believe her? Angela had no medical credentials, no degree in chemistry or toxicology, but she knew what she was seeing: the hand cream, the gradual decline, the signs of thallium poisoning. It made sense, but how could she possibly prove it? How could she convince the doctors who had everything at their disposal that they were missing something so simple? Angela's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and determination. She knew what she had to do, but who would listen? She had been invisible to everyone, a background figure in a world of doctors, but this was different. This was her moment. She couldn't turn away from the truth, no matter the consequences. Angela knew what she was about to do would change everything, but she had no choice. She had the knowledge, the intuition, and now the drive to act. If she didn't, Kenneth Blackwell would die. And so she stepped into the lab, ready to do what no one else could. Angela had stepped into a world she didn't belong in, a world that saw her as invisible. But the truth was clear now. Angela Beaumont wasn't just a housekeeper. She was the key to saving Kenneth Blackwell's life. The test was positive. Thallium, the poison that had been gradually killing Kenneth. But would anyone believe her? And even if they did, would they listen in time to save him? What will Angela do next? Will she step forward and risk everything, or remain silent, invisible once again? Angela had been invisible for years, moving through the hospital unnoticed. But now, in the quiet of this lab, she stood poised to uncover the truth that everyone else had missed. She wasn't just another housekeeper anymore. She was the key. But would anyone believe her once she exposed the dark secret she was about to uncover? Angela's mind raced as she picked up the cream. Thallium poisoning. She remembered it all too well from her toxicology class. She'd read about it years ago, when her path was still that of a promising young scientist. It was silent, slow, and deadly, a perfect poison for someone with access to the right poisonous chemicals. And Burke had been the one bringing it to Kenneth, using the hand cream as a vehicle for the slow, deliberate attack. Angela wasn't the type to shy away from a challenge. She had always been the one to step back, unnoticed, never questioning the authority around her. But now, with Kenneth's life hanging in the balance, she couldn't ignore it anymore.
The knowledge she had was the key, the answer that could save him. Angela could feel the weight of her actions. If this was wrong, if she was overstepping, there would be consequences. But if she was right, if the poisoning was real, then it wasn't just Kenneth's life she was saving. It was the truth, a truth that would shake the hospital, change her life, and expose the depths of a conspiracy that no one had suspected. It was clear. The test was definitive. Valium. It was in the cream. It had been slowly poisoning Kenneth. Every visit from Burke had made him weaker. The plan was working perfectly, too perfectly, and yet no one saw it. No one noticed. Angela had the proof, but now she faced her next hurdle. Who would listen? She was a housekeeper, a servant in their eyes. Would they believe her, or would they dismiss her as they always had before? The answer lay in her hands, but her next move would be the hardest of all. The clock was ticking. Kenneth's health was deteriorating by the hour, and Angela knew that every second counted. She had to act now before it was too late. Angela's path had been set long ago, even before the first test results. She had lived a life of sacrifices, of missed opportunities. Now, in this moment, she had a chance to take control, to claim her place in the world, not as a housekeeper, but as someone who had the power to change everything. With the test results in hand, Angela knew that her life would never be the same. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. But the real question was, would they believe her? Would the doctors and the medical team listen to the woman who had been invisible for so long? This was the moment where Angela's fate would be decided. Would she be believed? Would she be dismissed? Or would she become the woman who saved Kenneth Blackwell's life?
Angela's heart pounded in her chest as she carefully closed the door behind her. She had done it. She had uncovered the cause of Kenneth's mysterious illness, the key to saving his life. It felt surreal, almost as though she were still dreaming. The quiet, humble housekeeper had become the woman who held the answer to a billionaire's survival. The test results had come back, and the evidence was undeniable. Thallium poisoning. She had been right all along. The symptoms Kenneth displayed perfectly matched the toxic effects of thallium, a rare and insidious poison that left the doctors baffled. Yet Angela, in her quiet observation, had pieced the puzzle together. The hand cream had been the culprit. But now came the hard part. What would she do with this information? The medical team had not given her a second thought before. She was just a housekeeper, after all. But now she was holding the key to Kenneth Blackwell's survival. She stood in the hallway outside Dr. Simmons' office, her palms sweating, her breath shallow. She had to confront the doctor, who had always regarded her as invisible, the same doctor who had dismissed her suggestion about thallium poisoning. Angela had to make her believe. She had to make them all believe. A voice in the back of her mind urged her to walk away, to let someone else handle it, but she knew she couldn't. She had already seen too much. She had already saved Kenneth's life by connecting the dots others had missed, and now she couldn't turn back. She stepped forward, her feet dragging as if they were weighted down by the gravity of the situation. She knocked on Dr. Simmons' office door. "Come in," Dr. Simmons' voice called, her tone brisk as always. Angela entered the room, her heart in her throat. Dr. Simmons was sitting behind her desk, flipping through a stack of papers. The other doctors in the room glanced up momentarily, but there was no warmth in their gazes. They weren't expecting much from her. "Dr. Simmons," Angela began, her voice sounding steadier than she felt. "I believe I've found what's wrong with Mr. Blackwell." Dr. Simmons raised an eyebrow, a subtle sign that Angela's interruption had caught her attention. "Go on," she said, though her voice remained skeptical. Angela could feel the eyes of the other doctors on her. She wasn't just a housekeeper now. She was an intruder in their world. They didn't belong to her, she belonged to them. Her thoughts swirled with doubt, but she pressed on. "I've been reviewing Mr. Blackwell's symptoms, and they match thallium poisoning. I believe the source is the hand cream he's been using regularly." She didn't dare pause for fear of losing her courage. The room fell silent. Dr. Simmons stared at her, her expression unreadable. "Thallium poisoning," she repeated, as if the words didn't quite make sense to her. "And you're sure about this?" she asked. Angela nodded. "Yes, I'm sure." It's a slow-acting poison that is difficult to detect. The symptoms fit perfectly with what I've seen in Mr. Blackwell. I believe it's the hand cream he's been using regularly. There was a slight tension in the air, a mix of disbelief and suspicion. Angela could feel the weight of the doctor's dismissiveness like a 1,000-pound brick on her chest. She had never been treated like this before. Her whole life had been defined by this invisibility. They didn't belong to her, she belonged to them. Her thoughts swirled with doubt, but she pressed on. "I'm not suggesting anything," Angela replied, her voice firm, her emotions simmering under the surface. "I'm telling you that this is the diagnosis. I'm sure of it. I've worked with chemistry for years, and I know the signs." Dr. Simmons' lips curled into a tight smile, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized Angela. "Well, Angela," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "we'll certainly look into it, but I'm afraid your expertise won't replace the expertise of our team here." Angela's stomach tightened and she could feel the heat rise in her cheeks. She had always been looked down on by the medical staff. Housekeepers to them were invisible, but Angela was no ordinary housekeeper. She had earned her knowledge. She wasn't asking for their respect, she was demanding it. She could feel the doctor's eyes on her, silently judging her. "I'm not suggesting anything," Angela replied, her voice firm, her emotions simmering under the surface. "I'm telling you that this is the diagnosis. I'm sure of it. I've worked with chemistry for years, and I know the signs." Dr. Simmons looked at her for a long moment, her gaze sharp, as if she was measuring Angela's worth. Then, with a resigned sigh, she gestured toward the door. "We'll run some tests and see if your theory holds up, but don't expect us to take your word for it." Angela stood there for a moment, holding back the tears that threatened to spill. She wanted to scream, to shout at them for dismissing her, for seeing her as nothing more than a cleaner, but she couldn't. She had come too far to let them push her aside now. "I'll leave you to your work," she said, her voice almost steady as she turned to walk away. As Angela stepped back into the hallway, she felt a sense of hopelessness creeping in. They hadn't believed her, but she wouldn't give up. She couldn't, not when Kenneth's life was on the line. She had one last chance to prove herself, to make them understand the gravity of what she had discovered. But as she walked down the sterile white hallway, a nagging thought bubbled up in her mind. What if they still didn't believe her? What if she had risked everything for nothing? Just as she reached the stairwell, Angela's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, heart racing. The message was simple, but it made her freeze in place. "They know. Don't trust anyone." Her mind spun as she read the text. Who was it from? Who knew? Was it from the medical team? Someone who had been watching her, or was there something darker at play? Her legs went weak as the truth began to set in. The conspiracy was much bigger than she had ever imagined. Burke Jefferson's betrayal was just the beginning. But who else was involved? And how deep did this go? She couldn't ignore the warning. She had to act fast. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen in the hallway. The doctors had dismissed her, but they had no idea what was coming next. Angela had uncovered something far more sinister, and it was now her responsibility to stop it before it was too late. This was just the beginning. The real fight for Kenneth's survival was yet to come.
Angela had worked at Morningside Hospital for years. She had cleaned the floors, polished the windows, and carried the weight of everyone else's discarded thoughts. But never once had she been truly seen. Today, however, she stood at the precipice of something bigger than herself. Her intelligence, long overlooked, had become the key to saving Kenneth Blackwell, the man whose life hung in the balance. But in a world that had made her invisible, could she trust herself to step forward? Could she risk everything on a whisper of knowledge and save the man who had never even noticed her? I could just walk away. Let the doctors do their thing. They're the experts, not me. I'm just a housekeeper. What right do I have to speak up? What if they laugh at me? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm fired? But then, what if I'm right? What if I could save him? What if Kenneth Blackwell could be saved because I took a stand? Every step toward Dr. Simmons' office felt like an impossible choice. To risk her entire future for a man who had never noticed her existence. Angela Beaumont, the housekeeper, was about to become the woman who would change the course of a billionaire's fate. But would she be dismissed, or would she be seen for the first time? What am I missing? His body's rejecting everything. The tests, they don't add up. Angela had lived her whole life as the invisible woman. Overlooked by society, she had learned to adapt. The constant struggle to be heard had shaped her into someone who kept to the shadows, silent and unnoticed. But here, in this hospital corridor, in this very moment, her silence could cost a life. Could she finally find the courage to speak out? Dr. Simmons, I believe I know what's happening with Mr. Blackwell. It's thallium poisoning. Thallium poisoning? Angela, you're a housekeeper. What makes you think you know better than all of us, doctors who've been running tests for weeks? Because I've seen it before. I studied it in college. It's slow, it's insidious, and it's the hand cream. Every time Burke Jefferson visits, his condition worsens. And you, a housekeeper, studied toxicology? I think you've gotten ahead of yourself. We've done all the tests. We've ruled out the obvious. This is not just a case of poisoning. Am I being crazy? Could I be wrong? But I know what I saw. The symptoms match. The hand cream is the key. Angela, I can't just take this at face value. You're not even part of this team. The test results are inconclusive, and we've already run metal toxicity tests. Thallium would have shown up. You tested for metals, but not for thallium specifically. It's elusive. It can mimic other conditions, and standard panels won't detect it unless you're specifically looking for it. We can't just start testing for everything because someone thinks it's a case of poisoning. We need facts, not theories. Please, I'm telling you, this is more than what you're seeing. Kenneth's condition fits every symptom of thallium poisoning. You need to run the right tests. It could be the only way to save him. All right, we'll run one more test, but I still don't believe you. This has to be something else. Angela had spoken out, and now she had to hope that the doctors would take her seriously. If the tests came back positive for thallium, her gamble would have paid off. But if they didn't, she could be dismissed, ignored and treated like a fool. Her career was on the line, but so was Kenneth's life. The clock was ticking and Angela had put everything on the line. Will the doctors believe her? Or will Kenneth Blackwell slip away, his life lost to invisibility and misdiagnosis?
It was a cold, stormy evening when Burke Jefferson finally arrived at the hospital. His tailored suit, perfectly pressed, was a sharp contrast to the dark, dreary atmosphere in the hospital hallway. He strode past the busy nurses, his steps calculated, his eyes sharp, though they always seemed to be looking over his shoulder. His reputation preceded him. Kenneth Blackwell's business partner, a charming and well-connected man with an air of affluence and sophistication that often masked his true nature, Burke had always been the silent contender, quietly watching Kenneth's empire grow, secretly plotting how he could take it all for himself. Burke Jefferson had always been ambitious, too ambitious, some would say. Behind his charisma and charm was a cold, calculated desire for power. Power that was not just about wealth, but control. And when it came to Kenneth Blackwell's empire, Burke would stop at nothing to see it crumble under his feet. But Kenneth Blackwell, the billionaire who had built his tech empire from nothing, wasn't just a man to be feared. He was a symbol of indomitable will, and that's what made Burke's secret plot all the more dangerous. Burke's rivalry with Kenneth was one that had existed for years, but the animosity between them had always been hidden behind polished meetings and public appearances. While Kenneth dominated the tech industry with his forward-thinking approach to business, Burke had been quietly ingraining himself in Kenneth's circle, building his own influence from within, all the while waiting for his moment. That moment had now come, though it had taken a very different, far darker path than Burke ever expected.
Kenneth's empire was too big, too public. He was always so confident, so sure of himself. He never once thought that someone like me would be the one to tear it all down. But if I'm the one to take him down, I'll take everything. I've spent too long being the shadow. Now is my time to rise. Inside Kenneth Blackwell's private medical suite, the doctors were scrambling. Time was slipping away, and each passing minute felt like a race against the clock. Kenneth's condition had deteriorated sharply overnight, and the medical team was still at a loss. Dr. Simmons had been pacing nervously by Kenneth's bedside, her hands shaking slightly as she reviewed his medical records for the 10th time that hour. The team had run a battery of tests, blood panels, organ function checks, metabolic screenings, but the results had been inconclusive. They were out of ideas, and the frustration in the room was palpable. Nothing makes sense. We've tested for everything. His liver, kidneys, metabolic systems, they're all failing, but nothing we're doing is helping. What are we missing? Kenneth, still unconscious, lay motionless, his breath shallow. His once pristine appearance had become haggard, and his once proud frame seemed frail and diminished. The billion-dollar mogul who had once dominated boardrooms with his sharp mind and authoritative voice was now nothing more than a helpless figure lying in a bed, struggling for his life. Dr. Reynolds leaned over, reviewing the charts with a furrowed brow. He was the most experienced in the room, and yet even he felt a pang of fear deep within. He could feel the pressure mounting with each second. They were running out of time. We've covered the basics. What else? Has anyone checked for environmental factors? Is there something in the hospital that could be affecting him? Dr. Lee shook his head, exhausted. We're overthinking this. It's not environmental. He's not responding to anything we've given him. We need to call in another specialist. The medical team's growing desperation became evident as the hours wore on, but every theory they tried failed. As the doctors argued in circles, Angela Beaumont, the housekeeper, quietly continued her work in the background. To the doctors, she was invisible, a mere presence moving in the periphery. She had always been invisible, except when the floors needed cleaning or the surfaces required polishing. But Angela, despite being ignored by most, was no fool. She wasn't just a cleaning woman. She had once been a chemistry student, a brilliant one at that, until circumstances forced her to leave her education behind to care for family. She had once dreamed of working in a lab, of becoming someone who made a real difference in the world of science, but those dreams had slipped through her fingers like sand in the wind. As she moved silently through the room, her eyes caught sight of something the others hadn't: the hand cream. It had been brought in by Burke Jefferson, Kenneth's business partner, just 2 days ago. Angela had seen it there every day since then. But today something was off. The bottle had been moved to a new position on the table. Angela's instincts, sharp and finely tuned after years of quietly observing, told her something was wrong. As she cleaned, Angela's mind raced. She had witnessed Kenneth Blackwell deteriorate rapidly in the last few days, and the doctors, despite all their knowledge and tools, had been unable to find the cause. They were looking in the wrong places. Angela knew that. She had been trained to observe, to see patterns that others missed, and she had noticed an odd pattern with the hand cream. Every time Burke came into the room, Kenneth's symptoms worsened. At first, Angela dismissed it as coincidence, but as the days wore on, she started connecting the dots. The hand cream had something to do with it. It's thallium poisoning. I've seen it before, in textbooks, in class. It's the only explanation that makes sense. But who will believe me? I'm just a housekeeper. I'm not supposed to be the one to figure this out. Her mind flashed back to the time when she was in college, working tirelessly in the labs, piecing together complex chemical reactions. She had always been good at it. It was second nature to her. But life had dealt her a different hand. Now she was invisible to everyone around her, and here she was, standing on the verge of making a discovery that could change everything. But who would believe a housekeeper? Would Dr. Simmons take her seriously? Would the medical team dismiss her as just another member of the support staff, or would they see her for what she truly was, a scientific mind hidden beneath the surface? I have to do something. I can't just stand by and let them fail. Kenneth Blackwell deserves more. I've worked too hard for this moment, for my chance to make a difference.
As the doctors argued amongst themselves, Angela turned and stepped quietly into the hallway. She couldn't wait any longer. Kenneth's life was hanging by a thread, and she knew that she had to take action. She made her way down to the hospital lab, her heart pounding with every step. Her hands felt clammy, and the weight of what she was about to do bore down on her. She needed to test the hand cream. Angela knew that the hospital lab was equipped with everything she needed to conduct a preliminary test. Her chemistry background, buried under years of invisibility, was her only tool in this moment. Her steps were steady, but her mind raced. Was she doing the right thing? Would they trust her results? The doubts crept in, but she pushed them aside. This was it. Kenneth's last hope was resting on her ability to get it right. As she stood in front of the testing equipment, Angela took a deep breath. This was no longer about just her dreams. It was about saving a man's life. A man who had everything, but was now helpless. She silently acknowledged her fears, but they only fueled her determination. Angela applied a small amount of the hand cream to the test materials, carefully following the procedure she knew so well. The minutes felt like hours as she anxiously awaited the results. What if she was wrong? What if the doctors had already tried everything she knew? But as she peered through the microscope, a rush of relief swept over her. The test had reacted. Thallium. She couldn't deny it. The poison was there. I was right. It's thallium poisoning. But the reality hit her hard. Now what? She had the proof, but would anyone believe her? Would the medical team listen to her? And what would Burke do when he found out that his poisoning plot had been uncovered?
The hospital room was abuzz with activity. The nurses moved in a hurried, synchronized fashion as Dr. Simmons barked orders, her clinical confidence beginning to falter. The beeping of the monitors was a relentless reminder of the precious time slipping away. Kenneth Blackwell, the billionaire tech mogul who had once been invincible in his empire, now lay frail and weak in the sterile confines of his private suite. His pulse rate fluctuated wildly, his once strong frame barely recognizable under the layers of medical sheets and equipment. Kenneth had always been larger than life. His dominance in the tech world, his ability to outthink competitors, his visionary ideas that shaped the future, all of it had been built on the firm belief that nothing could break him. But now, as his body struggled to stay alive, the walls of Morningside Hospital felt impossibly thick, separating him from his former world. He stared up at the ceiling, the machines whirring and clicking in the background, but his thoughts were elsewhere. His thoughts were frantic, his mind unable to grasp how this was happening. His hands, once steady and precise in board meetings, now trembled, his energy drained away in ways that were impossible to control. The great Kenneth Blackwell, who had conquered the tech world, now couldn't even conquer his own body. This isn't how it was supposed to go, Kenneth thought, his mind working in overdrive. I was supposed to lead, to innovate. I built this empire from nothing, and now I'm just a man, lying in a bed, powerless. My team is running tests on me as if I'm just another experiment, but I've been experimenting with life, not death. The anger bubbled inside him. He had never failed before, but now it felt like he was failing on every front. What was going on? Why wasn't the medical team finding answers? Kenneth had pushed his limits throughout his life. He had fought for every inch of his success. But now his health seemed to be slipping away, and the people who were supposed to save him had no answers. Kenneth clenched his jaw. He knew he had money, he had resources, but none of it mattered here. Money couldn't save him from this. The medical team, the best doctors money could buy, had been circling Kenneth for hours, running a never-ending series of tests. Dr. Simmons, the team leader, was under pressure from every side. The staff had exhausted their typical diagnostic methods, and nothing was working. Each test failed to give them any real answers. Dr. Simmons was a woman used to taking control. She had faced countless high-pressure situations, from high-stakes surgeries to life-or-death decisions that tested her expertise. But nothing had prepared her for this. Kenneth Blackwell's case was elusive. The symptoms didn't match any known illnesses, and the treatment protocols seemed pointless. The frustration was building, and the air felt thick with it. We've run every possible test. His liver enzymes, kidneys, heart function, all of it's coming back inconsistent.
It's like his body's rejecting itself, but there's no diagnosis. Her voice cracked with frustration. Dr. Reynolds, a veteran in the field, shook his head. I've seen this before. It's not just a virus. His body is deteriorating too fast. We need to focus on something else, but I can't figure out what. They were clearly losing control. The doctors exchanged glances. They had exhausted their options, but nothing worked. It wasn't just the tests, it was the fact that they were looking at a man who had everything, yet nothing could save him. Maybe it's something we're missing, something hidden, like a poisoning. What if this is deliberate? It could explain the slow deterioration, the symptoms mimicking multiple organ failure. The suggestion caused a brief silence in the room. Dr. Simmons looked at Dr. Park, an incredulous expression on her face. Dr. Simmons, dismissively. Poisoning? Seriously? Park, this Kenneth Blackwell we're talking about. A tech mogul, a billionaire, not some third-rate criminal. It doesn't make sense. But Dr. Park wasn't so sure. He had seen cases like this before, where the poisoning was not detected until it was too late. Meanwhile, Angela continued to move through the hospital, her presence barely noticed. She was still the invisible one, just another person cleaning the floors, attending to the menial tasks that no one else wanted to do. But to Angela, the chaos unfolding in the room was anything but ordinary. Angela wasn't just a housekeeper, she knew science. And while the doctors in charge of Kenneth's care were too focused on the conventional methods, Angela noticed things they didn't. She stood near the door, cleaning a nearby counter, but her eyes never left the scene unfolding before her. The doctors were frantically debating, but the answer was right there in front of them. Kenneth Blackwell was being poisoned. But by whom?
Angela's heart raced. The cold fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway reflected off the polished floors, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly toward her. Her thoughts were clouded with doubt, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her cleaning cart. The weight of what she was about to do felt unbearable. The moment had arrived, the moment when she would either save a billionaire's life or be dismissed as just another invisible worker, a non-entity in a world where power and status ruled. Kenneth Blackwell, the tech mogul who had built an empire, was on the brink of death. His health had worsened so rapidly that even the most advanced medical minds in the country had no answers. But Angela knew something the doctors didn't. She had the key to saving him. What if I'm wrong? What if they laugh at me? What if they fire me on the spot? Angela thought. She had faced so many doubts in her life, but none like this. Her every instinct screamed that she was right, that the symptoms Kenneth was displaying weren't just random. They were the signs of thallium poisoning, a rare and insidious form of toxicity. But how could she prove it? She was just a housekeeper. Would they even listen to her? As she hesitated outside Dr. Simmons' office, she watched the doctors coming and going, focused on their work, their diagnoses, completely unaware of what was really happening to Kenneth. The silence in the hallway felt suffocating. The stakes were so high, and Angela could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Her heart pounded as she took one step forward, then another, until she stood at the door of Dr. Simmons' office. Angela was no stranger to sacrifice. She had spent years working in the background, invisible to most people around her. Her intelligence had always been there, hidden behind the layers of her cleaning uniform. She had once been a top chemistry student, with a promising future ahead of her, but the responsibilities of caring for her family had forced her to put her dreams on hold. And now, as a housekeeper in a prestigious hospital, she had been invisible again. No one saw her, no one acknowledged her potential, but she saw everything. The doctors might dismiss her, but she could not ignore the nagging feeling inside her. The hand cream, the Switzerland-imported cream that Kenneth used, was the key. It was the delivery system for the poison that had been slowly taking his life. Angela's mind worked faster than ever before, connecting the dots between the symptoms, her chemistry knowledge, and the strange behavior of the so-called friend, Burke Jefferson, who had been bringing the cream regularly. Thallium poisoning was rare, but it fit everything. But what if she was wrong? What if she had missed something? Her fear of failure gnawed at her. She wasn't just worried about being wrong, she was terrified of what would happen if the doctors didn't believe her. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway as she approached Dr. Simmons' office. She was almost there. She could feel the tension in her stomach. The moment of truth was just a few steps away. She knocked lightly, and the door opened. Dr. Simmons looked up from the papers in her hands, her expression unreadable. Angela hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. She had never been so unsure of herself in all her years. But when she looked into Dr. Simmons' eyes, something stirred inside her. She had to speak up. Kenneth's life was on the line. Everything depended on this moment. The room was cold, sterile, a place where lives were saved and lost. But today, it was a place where the truth would unfold. Angela Beaumont, the quiet housekeeper who had once been invisible to the world around her, stood at the edge of Kenneth Blackwell's private room. He had survived, against all odds, thanks to her. Yet, now the hospital was on the verge of an emotional tipping point. The doctors were on the brink of acknowledging their failure to see what Angela had seen all along. Kenneth, the tech mogul, the titan of his industry, was lying unconscious on the bed. Machines beeped rhythmically, a constant reminder of how close he had come to slipping away forever. Dr. Simmons, the lead doctor, stood at the head of the bed, her forehead furrowed with lines of exhaustion and disbelief. Around her, a group of medical professionals moved in hurried silence, analyzing results, debating diagnoses, and debating what had gone wrong. For days, Kenneth's health had been deteriorating rapidly. The team had been caught in an endless cycle of failed treatments and misdiagnoses. Nothing worked. Every possible test had been run, every expert consulted, and still they had no answers. The sense of frustration in the air was palpable. There was no longer a sense of hope, just the dread of knowing that they were on the verge of losing the man who had built an empire from the ground up. Dr. Simmons was particularly affected. She had dedicated her career to solving medical puzzles, to saving lives, but Kenneth's case had shaken her to the core. The best minds in medicine had been put to the test, and yet they were coming up empty-handed. We've run every test we could think of. We're still no closer to figuring out what's happening to him. The words lingered in the air. Angela, standing quietly by the door, overheard them, her heart heavy. She knew what the problem was long before the doctors had even started their endless rounds of tests. The hand cream, Kenneth's unusual dependence on it. Angela's mind raced back to the countless times she had cleaned the billionaire's suite, noticing the odd discoloration around his fingernails and the slight tremors in his hands. He had never been the same since the cream was introduced. Her scientific background, her chemistry knowledge screamed at her. Thallium poisoning. A slow, insidious killer. It was a substance so difficult to detect that even the best medical minds couldn't spot it. But Angela had recognized the symptoms from her own studies. She had witnessed the gradual poisoning, the slow deterioration of Kenneth's body, and she knew what it was. The problem was convincing a room full of highly trained doctors that a housekeeper could solve a mystery they couldn't. The tension in the room grew thicker as Dr. Simmons and her colleagues continued to argue about possible causes for Kenneth's illness. Angela, who had been in the background cleaning and observing, was starting to lose her patience. She was no longer content to remain silent. She had seen the signs, and now the situation was becoming critical. Kenneth Blackwell's life was hanging by a thread, and no one but her had the answers. They can't see it. I'm the only one who knows. They won't listen to me, but I have to try. Her internal struggle was real. Her invisibility had always been her burden, but now it was a strength. She had to speak up. If she didn't, Kenneth could die. It was that simple. She took a deep breath and pushed forward. She couldn't wait any longer. If she didn't act now, she'd lose him, and she couldn't live with that. Dr. Simmons, I think I know what's happening. Dr. Simmons turned to look at her, the weight of the moment heavy in her eyes. The doctors had all paused, waiting for her to speak. Angela, you've been cleaning this room. You've been in and out, but you're not a doctor. How could you possibly know more than all of us? The words were dismissive. Angela felt the sting, but it only fueled her determination. She had seen enough. She knew this was the moment she had to break through. I've been observing his symptoms. I think it's thallium poisoning. The symptoms match exactly, and I believe it's in the hand cream. The room fell silent. Dr. Simmons, along with the other doctors, exchanged confused looks. For a moment, there was nothing but stunned silence. Angela, the housekeeper, had just proposed a theory that the entire medical team had missed. She had just accused the billionaire's treatment of being the cause of his collapse.
Dr. Simmons stared at Angela, disbelief written across her face. But there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes now, a glimmer of something that might be more than skepticism. Thallium poisoning. How do you even know about that, Angela? It's extremely rare, Angela. We've tested for heavy metals. We've ruled that out. Angela's heart raced, but she didn't back down. I've studied it in college. Thallium doesn't always show up in standard tests. It can take days to appear in a blood sample, and it's absorbed through the skin. The cream he's been using every day, it's the perfect delivery system for it. She could see the doctors looking at each other, their doubts still evident. They were reluctant to listen to a housekeeper, but Angela knew she had to push. This was her only chance to save Kenneth. But before anyone could respond, the sound of Kenneth's heart rate monitor took over the room. The alarm blared sharply as its pitch rose as his vital signs suddenly dropped. His heart rate is plummeting. We need to stabilize him now. The chaos in the room escalated as the doctors scrambled to administer life-saving measures. Angela stood frozen for a second, watching as they tried to stabilize Kenneth, but all she could think about was the hand cream. Was it too late? Would the doctors listen to me now? In the middle of the storm, Dr. Simmons turned back to Angela, her face a mixture of doubt and urgency. Get the cream. We'll run a test. But if you're wrong about this, Angela, you're on the line. Angela nodded, her pulse racing and sprinting to the counter where the cream was still resting. This was it. The moment of truth. She grabbed the cream and dashed out of the room toward the lab. Time was slipping away, and she knew it was now or never.
The hospital halls were eerily quiet, an unusual stillness hanging in the air after the intense chaos of the last few days. The lights above buzzed faintly as the day drifted into late evening, casting long shadows on the walls. It had been a time of reckoning. Kenneth Blackwell, the billionaire tech mogul who had once seemed invincible, had come dangerously close to death, and a new chapter was unfolding. Kenneth was still recovering in the ICU, but the doctors had come to terms with what had really been happening. It wasn't some unknown illness, some rare disease they couldn't find, but a slow, deliberate poisoning. The poison had been delivered through something as inconspicuous as a hand cream, but its effects were deadly, and the culprit had been someone trusted, someone close. Burke Jefferson, the once well-respected business associate and supposed ally, was at the heart of it all. Outside the sterile walls of the hospital, a swarm of police officers surrounded Burke Jefferson's mansion. The arrest was imminent. Burke was facing charges of attempted murder. He had poisoned Kenneth Blackwell in a calculated, methodical way, and no one had seen it coming. Burke Jefferson, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Kenneth Blackwell. You have the right to remain silent. Burke's face was stone cold, his usual smirk wiped away. He didn't resist as the handcuffs were clicked into place. In his mind, he had already won. He was always one step ahead, right? Or at least that's what he had believed. But now, the consequences of his actions were starting to settle in. The rise to power that had once seemed assured was crumbling. Corporate espionage wasn't just a whispered rumor, it was a reality, and Burke was the mastermind. The ambitious plans he had been executing behind closed doors now lay in ruin. He had betrayed the very system that had elevated him, and now it was coming back for him. Back inside the hospital, Angela Beaumont stood in the center of it all, reflecting on the events that had transpired. The police were now investigating Burke's role in the poisoning plot, and the pieces were beginning to fit together. Burke's business dealings had intertwined with Kenneth Blackwell's empire for years, but the deception went deeper. The reach of Burke's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was corporate espionage at its worst. Angela had been part of the puzzle, but as she stood there watching the police work, she felt the weight of what had happened settle in. She hadn't been the one to find the evidence first, nor had she been the one to report it immediately. It had taken time for her suspicions to grow, time for the pieces to align in her mind. But she had never expected to be part of something this enormous. Angela had long been invisible to the medical staff, a housekeeper with no voice in the world of medicine or high finance. Yet in a span of mere days, she had become the unsung hero of the story. It was she who had noticed the signs first. It was she who had taken the bold step to test the hand cream, risking everything for the chance to save Kenneth's life. Now, Kenneth's recovery was a story of gratitude and transformation, but there was still a sense of unfinished business. Angela had saved Kenneth's life, but the institutional barriers were still in her way. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a CEO. She was just Angela, a woman who had sacrificed her education to help her family, a woman who had faced constant disrespect but had pushed through it all to get here. But the medical staff, they hadn't yet fully grasped her significance. They still didn't know the full extent of her brilliance. In the grand scheme of things, she was still just the housekeeper who had stumbled upon a key discovery. But now, the medical team couldn't ignore her. Dr. Simmons, once skeptical, had seen Angela's contribution firsthand. Her knowledge had saved Kenneth, and now there was a growing sense of respect that Angela had earned. "Burke Jefferson, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Kenneth Blackwell. I never thought I'd be here. But now, this is the only place I belong." The reality of it hit her harder than expected. She had been an outsider in every way. No voice, no influence, but she had changed the course of history. She had saved a billionaire, and that wasn't just a footnote. It was a turning point. Kenneth's life had been saved, but the road ahead wasn't so clear. His empire was facing unprecedented turmoil, not just from Burke's actions, but from the seeds of corporate sabotage he had planted deep within the organization. The web was far more complex than anyone had imagined. As Burke was led away in handcuffs, the hospital staff couldn't believe their eyes. Burke Jefferson, a man of influence, a man that they had trusted, was now facing justice for the first time in his life. The idea of betrayal had never felt so real. Burke's arrest was the first step towards justice, but the road to fixing what he had done was far from clear. Kenneth Blackwell's empire had been shaken to its core. The implications of Burke's betrayal were still unfolding. For Angela, the realization that she had broken through the walls of invisibility felt bittersweet. She had saved Kenneth's life, but the price had been high. She was still fighting for recognition. The medical staff had begun to acknowledge her, but there were still barriers to break down. They were still learning to respect her, not just for what she had done, but for who she was. Kenneth Blackwell's recovery was slow, but as the days went by, his health steadily improved. His doctors were cautiously optimistic, but Kenneth himself couldn't shake off the weight of what had nearly happened. For a man who had built his empire on his brilliance, his connections, and his strategic mind, it was a humbling experience to face mortality in such a raw, visceral way. His empire was still in jeopardy. Burke Jefferson's treachery had threatened everything he'd worked for, and though Kenneth's health had begun to stabilize, the damage caused by Burke's actions was profound. Yet, amidst all this chaos, there was one person whose role had been pivotal: Angela Beaumont. Kenneth lay in his private hospital room, the white sheets tucked neatly around his body. The soft hum of medical equipment and the occasional shuffle of nurses' feet provided a constant background noise, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He reflected on how he had come so close to losing everything, a betrayal so subtle, so methodical, and yet it had nearly cost him his life. But there had been one person who had seen the signs long before the doctors, long before anyone else. Angela had been the one to notice the small details, the signs that had gone unnoticed by the brightest minds in the medical field. Her intuition had saved him. He remembered the moment when Angela had approached Dr. Simmons with her theory. He had been unconscious, unaware of the battle taking place around him, but he had heard enough from the doctors to know what had been happening. The medical team had been at a loss, unable to pinpoint the cause of his rapid decline. It wasn't until Angela had stepped forward that the first piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Angela Beaumont, the housekeeper, the invisible woman in a world dominated by white coats and expensive degrees, had known. It was a feeling, a quiet certainty, something that had been buried deep in her. A combination of knowledge from her college chemistry days and a deep understanding of human nature had led her to the truth. Kenneth had learned about it in bits and pieces: the hand cream, the test for thallium, the suspicion. But it was Angela who had pulled it all together, and ultimately it had been Angela who had saved him. The more Kenneth thought about it, the more his sense of awe for her grew. She had been invisible for everyone for so long, and now, because of her, he had a second chance at life. Kenneth Blackwell's life was no longer the same, but it wasn't just his life that had been saved, it was the entire tech empire he had built. Kenneth Technologies, once on the verge of collapse due to the covert sabotage, now had a chance to rebuild. But that rebuilding came with its own complications. The ripple effect from Burke Jefferson's treachery was still reverberating through the walls of Kenneth's empire, and the full extent of the damage wasn't clear. Kenneth was aware of how close he had come to losing it all. The thought of losing his business because of an inside betrayal by someone he had trusted was almost too much to bear. And yet, amidst all this uncertainty, the one thing he could cling to was the unwavering loyalty and bravery of Angela. Kenneth had come to realize that buried beneath the facade of the housekeeper was a woman with an immense amount of strength, intelligence, and courage. She had faced obstacles and challenges that most people couldn't imagine, yet she had risen above them. She had been undervalued, underestimated, but in the end, she had proven everyone wrong. The question now was, what would Angela do next? Kenneth had been through a lot over the past few weeks. The physical pain of his decline had been draining, but the emotional toll was perhaps more difficult to bear. His health had failed him when he needed it most, and the people he thought he could trust had betrayed him. But now, as he lay in that sterile room, surrounded by the cold glow of medical equipment, he knew that the one person who had never given up on him was Angela. His mind wandered to the day when she had finally approached Dr. Simmons with her diagnosis. It had been a critical moment, the turning point in his journey. And he remembered how skeptical Dr. Simmons was. She had been dismissive of Angela, almost as though she couldn't fathom that someone like Angela, just a housekeeper, could possibly have the answer. But Angela's persistence, her quiet confidence, had ultimately led to the breakthrough. Kenneth knew that Angela hadn't just saved him, she had given him hope when there had been none left.
and that hope wasn't something he would ever take for granted. Kenneth's thoughts were interrupted when Dr. Simmons entered the room. She was still looking at him with a mixture of respect and disbelief, as if still processing the enormity of what had happened. "Kenneth, you're a lucky man. We were all out of options, but there was one person who knew what was going on, and I didn't listen until it was almost too late. Dr. Simmons, you did your best, but there's someone I need to thank. She's the reason I'm still here. I know. Angela, she's something special. I never realized it until now." "Neither did I, but I do now. I owe her my life. She's saved not just me, but everything I've built. I have to do something for her." Kenneth's eyes welled up with gratitude as he thought of Angela. She had been the one to uncover the truth, and despite the massive obstacles she had faced, she had stayed the course. Kenneth knew that he owed her more than just thanks. He owed her the respect she deserved, the recognition she had never been given, and it was time for that to change. As Kenneth began his slow recovery, he found himself reassessing everything he had known about his life, his empire, and the people who had surrounded him. He was a man reborn, not just in terms of his health, but in his outlook on the world. The people he had once viewed as irreplaceable assets now seemed so much more. He had never given Angela the credit she deserved, and now more than ever, he realized how wrong he had been. But Angela wasn't the only one who needed to be recognized. Burke Jefferson's treachery had been a staggering betrayal, but the investigation into his actions was just beginning. Burke wasn't the only one who had been undermining Kenneth's empire. There was still loyalists to Burke within the company, and Kenneth knew that it wasn't over. The empire he had worked so hard to build wasn't just in danger from one man, it was now threatened from within. As Kenneth lay in his hospital bed contemplating the future, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. It was a member of his security team. "Mr. Blackwell, we've uncovered something. It seems Burke's actions have deeper roots than we initially thought. There's more going on behind the scenes." Kenneth's heart dropped. More? How deep did this go?
The atmosphere in the hospital was thick with a mix of disbelief and fear. The day had started like any other, with the usual shuffle of doctors and nurses going about their rounds. But today was different. Burke Jefferson, once a powerful and influential businessman within Kenneth's inner circle, was now facing the law for his treacherous actions. The security team had finally arrested him, and the echoes of his once confident steps in the halls of Kenneth Technologies were replaced by the cold clinking of handcuffs. In the sterile silence of the medical wing, every eye seemed to turn towards the security guards leading Burke away, as whispers of disbelief rippled through the staff. Burke, the charming and calculating businessman, was now the very definition of a criminal. A man whose position once allowed him to walk through these halls with pride now shuffled, head down, facing charges for attempted murder. Burke had been the silent architect of Kenneth's near demise, poisoning him with thallium, a deadly, almost undetectable poison. The shocking truth had been uncovered only after Angela Beaumont, the housekeeper, had noticed the small but significant details that others had missed. It was Angela, whose sharp intellect had brought the hidden conspiracy to light, who had saved Kenneth's life. And now, Burke's attempt to take Kenneth down was coming to a bitter end. As the police car pulled away, Kenneth Blackwell stood by his office window, looking out at the world he had fought so hard to build. His reflection in the glass seemed like a different man, one who had experienced both triumph and defeat in the same breath. The shadows from the trees outside stretched long across the lawn, their roots intertwined in the very ground beneath him, much like his empire. But Burke's betrayal had left scars on both Kenneth's health and his spirit. For the first time, Kenneth wondered whether power, real, unshakable power, was worth it. What was the point of it all if people you trusted could destroy everything in an instant? He ran his fingers across the smooth surface of his desk, the same desk where so many pivotal decisions had been made, and realized that everything had been built on the premise of trust. But trust was a fragile thing. Burke had taken that trust and shattered it, weaving his deception in the most insidious of ways. Kenneth had been poisoned by someone he thought was loyal, someone who had shared his vision for greatness. It was an ironic twist of fate that Angela, someone so often overlooked, had been the key to solving the mystery.
Angela Beaumont stood in front of the hospital mirror, staring at the reflection that seemed foreign to her. The face she saw was still hers, but the woman was different now. She was no longer just the housekeeper, the one who blended into the background. She had become someone important, someone whose actions had not only saved a life, but had also begun to change the course of her own. The memories of the past weeks flashed through her mind. The turmoil of discovering the poison that had been slowly killing Kenneth Blackwell, the battles with the medical staff, and the quiet moments when she had doubted herself. She had questioned her place in the world more times than she could count, but now those questions seemed irrelevant. Angela had found her purpose. It wasn't the fame or the recognition that mattered. It was the knowledge that she had made a difference, that her intuition and sharp intellect had saved a billionaire's life, a life she had never expected to have such an impact on. Angela smiled softly as she touched the small gold pendant around her neck, a gift from Kenneth in recognition of her role in the life-saving discovery. The recognition felt surreal, but it was a quiet, powerful recognition, the kind that was built on respect and gratitude, not just status or titles. And yet, despite the monumental shift in her role, Angela knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Angela had come from humble beginnings. She had once dreamed of becoming a chemist, working with substances and formulas that could change the world. But life had intervened. Family obligations had forced her to abandon her studies. She had taken jobs that kept her close to home, her dreams slipping further and further away with each passing year. Her journey from there to here had been long and full of sacrifice. Her sacrifices weren't just financial, they were emotional too. She had put her own dreams on hold to take care of others, watching as those dreams slowly faded, like distant stars growing dimmer in the sky. But now, as she looked at herself in the mirror, she realized that those sacrifices hadn't been in vain. Every moment had shaped her, had built the person standing before her today. The girl who had scrubbed floors, cleaned up messes, and remained invisible to the rest of the world was no longer invisible. Angela had found her voice, and it had saved a life. Now Kenneth was offering her something greater than just thanks. His gratitude was genuine, a reflection of the respect he now held for her. It wasn't just the recognition within the hospital walls. It was a chance to change her future forever. Kenneth Blackwell had always been a man of power and influence. He had made millions through his company, and his business empire had allowed him to move in circles few could dream of. But Kenneth had never been able to see beyond the surface of things. That was until he had met Angela. She had been the one to bring his empire to the brink of collapse, and in doing so, she had shown him something far more valuable than any business deal or partnership. She had shown him that the true value of a person wasn't found in the title they held or the money they accumulated. It was found in the choices they made, in the sacrifices they were willing to endure, and in the courage to do what was right. It was because of this realization that Kenneth offered Angela more than just a thank you. He had offered her a new beginning, one that included not just financial rewards, but also the chance to reclaim her dreams. Kenneth had said to her in his office just a few days ago, "Angela, I know what you've sacrificed. You put your dreams on hold for your family, for others. But now I want to make sure you never have to sacrifice anything again." Kenneth's offer had come as a surprise, but a welcome one. A scholarship to finish her chemistry degree. He was offering her the very thing she had once thought was beyond reach. And just as important, he was giving her the chance to rise above the invisible roles that society had forced her upon. The healing process had already begun, for Kenneth and for Angela. She was no longer defined by the scrubbing of floors or the dusting of surfaces. She was Angela Beaumont, a woman of intelligence, resilience, and courage. She was now part of the world-changing decisions happening around her. Kenneth's gift was more than just an academic opportunity. It was a symbol of how far she had come and a promise that she would never be invisible again.
As Angela sat in the library late at night, her books spread out before her, she couldn't help but think of the path that had led her here. She had been in this exact place years ago when her dreams had been interrupted by life. But this time, it was different. This time, she was not a housekeeper sitting in the background. She was a student, studying chemistry, her future in her own hands. The weight of the world had shifted. For the first time, Angela felt a sense of belonging. The struggles she had endured weren't just distant memories. They were part of the strength she carried with her every day. And that strength had been what had allowed her to save Kenneth's life, to see the truth when no one else did. She thought about the people who had never seen her, who had never recognized her for the intelligence she possessed. She thought about the colleagues who had brushed her off, the doctors who had questioned her abilities, and the hospital staff who had never taken the time to understand her. It all seemed so far away now, but the memories of that invisibility were still fresh. But now, Angela was changing the world in her own way. She was no longer hiding behind the guise of humility or obscurity. She had the power to shape the future. Kenneth stood in front of a crowded boardroom, the sunlight streaming through the large windows behind him. The entire team was gathered there, and Angela stood quietly off to the side, her heart racing in her chest. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. But Kenneth's words, as he spoke to the room, left her feeling like the most important person in the world. Everyone, I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who has shown us all what true courage and intelligence look like. Angela Beaumont not only saved my life, but she has also shown us all what it means to rise above. It is because of her that I'm here today, leading this company. Angela is a hero, and I will forever be grateful for what she's done. The room fell silent, the weight of Kenneth's words sinking in. Angela felt her cheeks burn as every eye turned to her. For a moment, she was overwhelmed by the enormity of what had happened. But as she looked around the room, something surprising happened. The people who had once dismissed her, the doctors, the security, the staff, were all now looking at her with respect and admiration. They had seen her, truly seen her, for the first time. And Angela realized that the battle she had fought to be acknowledged wasn't just for herself. It was for everyone who had been overlooked, who had been dismissed without a second thought. She had become more than just a hero. She had become a symbol of strength for everyone who had ever been overlooked. Angela sat at her desk in the chemistry department, a pile of textbooks in front of her. It was late and the campus was quiet. She had come so far, but the road ahead still stretched out before her. She wasn't done yet. She wasn't finished with her education. She wasn't finished with her dreams. She wasn't finished changing the world. The work wasn't over. It had only just begun. But as she stared at the books before her, Angela smiled. For the first time in a long time, the future felt like it was in her hands. And this time, nothing was going to hold her back.
Angela sat at her desk, her textbooks sprawled out before her, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling beside her. It had been a long day, another long night, filled with notes and equations, each page marking progress toward her goal. But her heart wasn't truly focused on the formulas or the theories. She had grown accustomed to the weight of her books in her hands, the steady rhythm of her studies. But tonight, it felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the entire world was shifting around her. Angela had come so far. The scholarship Kenneth Blackwell had gifted her wasn't just a monetary gesture. It was a recognition that her dreams, long forgotten, could still take flight. She was no longer just a housekeeper in the background. She was a student, and with every test, every paper, she was carving a path toward something greater than she had ever imagined. But as she sat there, immersed in her studies, something else gnawed at her, a strange feeling of unsettling calm. There was more to the story that had yet to unfold, and Angela could feel it deep in her bones. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up to see a message from Kenneth. "I need you in the office tomorrow. There's something I need to discuss. Kenneth."
The words were simple, yet there was an undercurrent of urgency in them. Kenneth had been more than a boss to her. He had become someone who believed in her when no one else did. But tonight, the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave her. The world had seemed to stabilize. Kenneth's health had improved, the crisis with Burke had passed, and for the first time, she had felt like she was truly standing on her own. But what had changed? What did Kenneth need to tell her? And why did she feel as though another storm was brewing just beyond the horizon? Her eyes drifted to the window, her gaze shifting to the horizon. The city lights glittered below, but they felt cold, distant. She was more than just the woman who had uncovered the poisoning. She was a part of something larger, something that was beginning to unravel right in front of her. The next morning, Angela arrived at the office early, before most of the staff had trickled in. The building was quiet, and she walked through the sterile white corridors with a sense of trepidation settling in her chest. Kenneth was already there, seated at his desk, his usually confident demeanor now shrouded in something else: tension. He didn't greet her with his usual charm, and the moment she entered the room, the air shifted. "Angela," he said, his voice low, "please, sit down." She did, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as her mind raced with questions. Kenneth's gaze was intense, but it wasn't the same as before. There was something in his eyes that spoke of fear and uncertainty. "Kenneth, what's going on? You said you had something to discuss," Angela asked, her voice steady but her heart pounding. Kenneth let out a slow breath. I don't know where to start." She waited for him to speak, but his silence stretched on. Finally, he met her eyes. "It's about Burke, and about what's been happening inside this company." Angela's heart skipped a beat. The name Burke still carried weight, even though he's now behind bars for his attempt on Kenneth's life. His betrayal had shaken the foundations of Kenneth's empire. And yet, the more Angela thought about it, the more she realized that Burke's arrest had not been the end. The more she learned, the more she uncovered, the clearer it became that there were more layers to this betrayal than anyone had seen. "Kenneth, what do you mean?" Angela pressed. Kenneth's expression hardened. "There's a network. Burke wasn't just a rogue player. He had allies, people on the inside, people I trusted. I thought it was over, but Angela, I don't think we've seen the full extent of what he's been doing." Angela felt the chill of his words, the weight of his revelations settling in her gut. The room, once sterile and controlled, now felt like it was closing in on her. A web of corruption had been built around Kenneth, and Burke was only the beginning. Her mind raced back to her quiet observations in the hospital, to the strange, lingering thoughts that had surfaced during her investigation. This wasn't just about Burke. There was more beneath the surface. Kenneth leaned forward in his chair, his fingers tapping on the desk in a nervous rhythm. "Angela, I need your help. I can't do this alone. I need someone I can trust." Angela felt a pang of responsibility stir inside her. Trust. She had learned to trust him, even when everyone around them had dismissed her. But this was different. Now she wasn't just standing beside him in a crisis. She was becoming a part of the solution. "What do you need from me?" Angela asked, her voice soft yet unwavering. Kenneth's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "We need to find out who's been leaking information. There are people in this company, high-ranking officials, executives, who've been working with Burke. I'm not sure who to trust anymore." The walls of the room seemed to close in further, and Angela found herself standing at the center of something much larger than herself. This wasn't just about Kenneth anymore. This was about his empire, and everything he had built was at stake. "I can help you," Angela said, her voice gaining strength. "But we need to be careful. If Burke's allies are still out there, they won't just back down. They'll fight back, and they'll do anything to protect their interests." Kenneth nodded slowly, his expression tight. "I know, but we have no choice. The longer we wait, the more control they gain." Angela felt the weight of the moment. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She wasn't simply a person who had uncovered a plot. She was actively involved in protecting the empire that had almost destroyed her life, and she was determined to see it through. As Angela left Kenneth's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something that was going to change her forever. She had already changed so much in the past few weeks. She had been recognized, respected, and elevated. But now, as she stood at the threshold of this new chapter, she knew that the stakes were higher than ever. The tech world was brutal, ruthless, and the world Kenneth had built was fragile, far more fragile than anyone realized. She thought about the anonymous message she had received late last night. It had been short, cryptic. Watch your back. Someone close to you will betray you. Trust no one. Her heart raced as she replayed the words in her mind. The warning had come from an unknown source, but its message was clear. Someone within Kenneth's inner circle was still loyal to Burke, or at least to the larger network of corruption that had undermined everything. Angela's eyes narrowed as she stepped into the elevator, her thoughts racing. There was a hidden danger inside the empire she had helped save, and she was now in the crosshairs. That night, as Angela sat in her small apartment, staring out the window at the glittering lights of the city, she felt the weight of the situation bearing down on her. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. Another message. This one from an unknown number. They know. They're watching you. Don't trust anyone, not even Kenneth. Angela's blood ran cold as she read the words. This wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. And now Angela realized she had no choice but to play the game. She couldn't just be a passive player anymore. She had to become a force, a protector of Kenneth's empire and her own future. But the real question remained. Who could she trust? As she put her phone down, Angela made a decision. She wasn't going to let this warning control her. Instead, she would take the fight to them. She would uncover the truth and find out who was pulling the strings from the shadows. And with that, Angela prepared for the battle of her life. What's next for Angela? Will she rise to even greater heights? Stay tuned for the next chapter in her extraordinary journey. And remember, your story is waiting to be written. Have you ever felt invisible like Angela did? What would you have done in her shoes? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if you want to follow her journey, subscribe to Heat Stories. We've got more powerful stories coming your way.